right. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our podcast series. We're excited to reconnect with our 2023 Grant Awardees and highlight the studies that have been funded by the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation. Not only do we want you to stay informed about the research in the field, but we also want you to get to know the researchers behind the projects that you've been able to support through donations, individuals who volunteered on our review panel, as well as those who even maybe participated in some of the funded studies. Today, we're lucky to have Dr. Julia Dallman, an associate professor at University of Miami in Florida, who was awarded the 2023 PMSF Translational Research Award for her project titled Validation of a Novel, Inexpensive, Home-Based Gastrointestinal Transit Test Among People with Phelan-McDermid Syndrome. Welcome, Dr. Dallman.
Thank you so much.
We're glad to have you here. So before we get into updates about your specific project, could you share with our families a little bit about your background and kind of how you found your way into Phelan-McDermid syndrome research?
Yeah, so I did my PhD in developmental neuroscience long ago in the 90s, and then a PhD in sort of more molecular neuroscience, but still focusing on development. And then I got to University of Miami in my faculty position. And at the same time I was hired, a lot of human geneticists from Duke were hired at University of Miami. And they made me aware of rare disease. And they were very interested in having zebrafish models associated with their gene discovery in rare disease. And so I had a colleague, Dr. Perchek-Vance, who asked if I could model autism in zebrafish. And that was a kind of complicated question because, zebrafish interpreting the phenotypes in zebrafish might be a little bit tricky. So we wanted to start with a model, a gene where there were a lot of models to kind of be able to understand what we saw in fish. And Shank3 seemed like a really good option. And so we started with that model, and that led us to attending the 2016 Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Conference. And we met families, and Dr. Colleen Haddigan presented that there were significant GI issues. Well, we had a model, and it was a transparent zebrafish. And so we could throw it on the microscope, and their guts just weren't moving.
Wow.
So the phenotype was super strong compared to some of the behavioral phenotypes that we've been looking at. And so that launched a deeper dive into what was going on with the reduced movement in the zebrafish guts. And in 2018, my graduate student presented at the Phelan-McDermid Family Conference. And you guys awarded him a poster award, and that the very strong phenotype also resulted in funding from the NIH to further understand what was behind that, and so we at that point we reached out to Dr. Baharak Mushiri because it's one thing to find something in an animal model. But she's an adult GI clinician, and her expertise is GI motility. And so it seemed a great opportunity to talk to her about what we were seeing. And she said, oh, well, could the same thing be happening in people? We knew people had constipation, and that can result from reduced motility, but it wasn't clear. And so she tested a breath test for stomach empty, where the kid will eat spirulina, and then you breathe into a tube, but the kids would not eat spirulina, would not. It smells funny. And so that coincided with COVID. And we decided to try to mimic the sort of state of the art for testing gut motility in people, which was eating an egg meal and then going into a 4-hour scan, which was not something that would be easy for families. And so we developed this blue muffin or Smurf cake. We like to call them Smurf cakes. And that was partly made possible by COVID because I was kicked out of my lab. So all of a sudden, zebrafish experiments couldn't proceed, right?
Yeah.
And so and in parallel, to make tracking easier, Dylan Baker, who's actually my son and a software engineer, and Dr. Barbara Millet, who's another PI on the grant, she works in communications and does user interface development. She had a class on app development, and they used a prototype that Dylan had made and refined it with families.
Wow.
To try to think about how you could do remote tracking. And that was all based on Dr. Kara Margolis's caregiver-assisted questionnaire that was also published around the same time.
Yeah.
And so that the pilot study was actually done with funding, the dregs of the funding from the R21, and a Shark Tank that Wake Forest hosted.
Fantastic.
Wow. But that showed that the app and the muffin could actually be used at home. We only did it with six participants.
Yeah. Gotta start somewhere.
It showed feasibility. And then in 2022, the Candid GI conference brought together the rest of the team. So that's so actually for the NIH, the R21, Billy had been written a letter of support, Billy Bennett. Okay. And he also helped to organize the Candid GI conference. And one of the other people at that conference was Calliope Halling. And that's where we all sort of assembled as a group and wrote the proposal.
Wow. That's, I think what I really appreciate your story is sort of like, I feel like there's a lot of serendipitous moments that happen in research, kind of connecting to the right people at the right time in the right place. And as bad as COVID was worldwide, there have been some unique things that have come out of it because it forced us all to be really flexible in our research plans. So I'm glad sort of, the stars aligned, so to speak, and you kind of found the right people, the right connections to make all of this happen. So congrats again on this Translational Research Award. The families listening, obviously, like GI symptoms are such a common feature that so many of our families have to navigate. So your work, really could have a really big direct impact on our community. Could you tell us a little bit more specifically about what your project's aims are, and kind of what you hope to accomplish?
Yeah, so the aims of the project are really to validate this approach that we used in the pilot. And so the first step of that is the pilot taught us what didn't work. So the first step, and part of what is tricky about transit time is it's a measure that takes place over days. And especially if there are problems with constipation, it can take place over 10 days. So writing an app, making the app so that it's user-friendly for tracking over that time when families have so much going on, so the first step of what we proposed to do was to work with families to refine the tool to make it easier to use. And that's been Barbara Millet and Dylan Baker have been going back and forth with testing, interacting with families, and then refinement, and then testing, and then refinement. So we're in the second round of refinement.
Okay.
And thank you so much to the families that have participated. Many of them come from outside of the United States. So the other thing that we've learned is that everything we've proposed to do is with families in the US, just because we're shipping muffins, And also when you have an app, you have a database, and the databases are different if they're in different parts of the world. The servers, you need a local server. And so, so one of the things that we're doing to try to be responsive to that realization is to create a version of the app that can support local storage so that families can use the app even if they're not involved in the study. And that means,
Okay.
it's not going to be translated, but for those English speaking families, or that, they can download the app and use it as a way to interact with their clinicians around.
That's wonderful.
But so as we're learning, we're refining, and that refining takes time. So that's where we are. We're hoping to start the transit studies in probably April, May.
Okay.
And the thing, so it's both the refinement and so I mentioned all these people that are collaborating on this proposal. University of Miami is one of the places. Dr. Baharak Moshiri is now at Wake Forest, and Stacy Keller. So Dr. Billy Bennett and Stacy Keller are at Riley Children's in Indiana. And Dr. Calliope Holling is at Johns Hopkins. So when all of these people interact with the data, you need everybody IRB approved, and you need those IRBs linked.
Yeah.
And as someone who works on zebrafish, this is not something I had experience with.
No, you probably didn't. It's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot. And not only that, but in our proposal, we said that we would also share the data with Phelan-McDermid Foundation and the Data Hub. So Stacy Keller has taken on this, she's taken on this huge job of coordinating the IRB and then linking and then making data use agreements so that everything is approved in the way it's supposed to be approved.
Right.
And that's it's a huge undertaking.
Yes. And I definitely want to emphasize that to families that, the IRB or the Institutional Review Board process for especially human subjects research is a lot. It takes a lot of time for all the I's to be dotted and T's to cross. And that's good. That protects the human subjects that are involved in the study. But coordinating 4 or 5 sites with data and human subjects research is going to set you back a lot of time and a lot of work hours.
And the other thing is that as we appreciate what works and what doesn't, we're also developing more patient-facing material, like a video to help with navigating the transit test, and instructional inserts that we put with the muffins. So all those also need to be approved by the Institutional Review Board.
Yep.
So first,
kudos,
and then the other side.
Yeah, kudos to you, especially coming from more basic biology, zebrafish, and sort of crossing this huge translational gap into sort of that patient-facing work, and being taking into account so much stakeholder feedback. But yeah, it's a lot. And just the same way that like a human researcher, I had started doing some molecular work and mouse work, and that has its own complexities that like I never considered in the human world. But yeah, doing both is a lot, but I'm glad you have sort of that team who sort of has a bunch of different expertise and hopefully the right places that make it all possible.
No, the team's amazing. And that was another thing that's very different from, so part of what we've been working on is, for instance, there's an onboarding survey that people fill out at the beginning of participating in the transit time test that asks about previous GI symptoms and whether they have any all sorts of different questions that are really the purview of Dr. Holling, Dr. Clyde Holling. But we wanted to make sure that the onboarding survey was harmonized with the app so that there would be sort of question and then follow-up tracking.
Right.
And so that's another piece that we've put in place. That's done.
That's wonderful.
So those are some pieces that we've been working on.
Yeah. And, I really do appreciate that sort of along the way, sort of adapting and being flexible with what your plan is. I think, that's obviously so important in research, but especially in human researcher where that like stakeholder experience is so important. You can't ask a zebrafish how the test is going. But you can talk to the parents, you can talk to the caregivers. And so that's important. For our families, out of curiosity, can you tell us a little bit more about like the muffin and like how that process works?
Yeah, sure. So what we do is we work with a baker, a commercial baker, and they cook up a batch of muffins and then freeze them. We freeze them for shipment, and then we package them on dry ice in styrofoam boxes, and then people who are approved on the study uh, put the addresses on the and coordinate with the families to receive the shipments.
Mhm.
Then once the families receive the muffins, they figure out when the best time is for them. So they're encouraged
Mhm.
to put them in the freezer until they're ready. And then they defrost them and put them in the oven for like 5 minutes at 350, and then they're ready to go. Um,
Mhm.
and so then it's a matter of it's best to the instructions are to eat the muffins over after an overnight fast, so after not eating for a night, and
Mhm.
um, and the reason for that is that as you eat food, it gets mixed up in your mouth and your stomach, but once it enters your intestine, it's sort of got its unique little timestamp. The
Mhm.
idea is to give that blue muffin its timestamp by eating it after an overnight not eating, and then you wait to see blue in the poop, and that you don't know when it's going to happen,
Yeah.
and so it's a matter of seeing when it comes, and it doesn't. Often the first stools to arrive are not blue
Right.
because there's already food in the system
Mhm.
and waste in the system that needs to be cleared. So often there are a few browns, and then a blue or blue-green comes, and that's the transit test.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, what a, innovative approach to sort of to really kind of go after GI motility, which I know is again sort of this really area of important exploration in our field. So, what are you most excited about this project? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot going on, and so you don't have to pick one thing, but kind of what makes you wake up every morning for this project?
So for this project in particular, I actually find it really wonderful to interact with the community, and I really I'm really hoping that this can be a way to have a a set of questions out there that can help um, that can help in the future to manage those symptoms, because it
Yeah.
allows families to track them over time, have a really good record of what's going on, and even see if there are changes that happen when they when they travel, or when they have different or if there's a
Right.
fever, or any kind of thing
Yeah,
that
exactly.
allows them to get some sense of it over time.
Mhm.
Um, and then I'm excited about the potential coordination between the zebrafish model and what we're doing. Because as we learn about the symptoms in the population, we're also learning about the mechanisms in the fish.
Yeah.
And I this last summer when I was at the Phelan-McDermid Family Conference, I met Dr. Tony Perisco, and he
Mhm.
had done a study in Italy of families with Phelan-McDermid, and found that just like the fish, they have reduced serotonin, which
Yeah.
is a really important hormone for gut motility.
Mhm.
And the way he measured it, the serotonin he was measuring comes from the gut. It doesn't come from the brain.
Fascinating.
So that suggests that this fish may, like what we find in fish, may hold for the population. So that's my biggest hope. That's like,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think, whether it's the Phelan-McDermid Family Conference or some other maybe scientific conferences you go to, I think it also becomes such an important opportunity for researchers across the spectrum to really collaborate and find out, oh, you were doing this in this lab or you're doing that. And especially because, obviously, like we are talking to our Phelan-McDermid syndrome families here, but GI motility issues are not specific to our community. And so it's also, exciting as like a broader rare disease field to think about some of the things that this could also lead to. So I know we talked already a little bit, especially kind of the collaborating across sites and the IRBs, about some of the challenges you faced in sort of this need for a no cost extension, which, as a reminder to our families, basically requests to extend the timeline of the research project without a request for additional funding. And very common in research because research, as we said, hardly goes according to plan. Are there any other sort of challenges or things that came up unexpectedly that sort of also has delayed the course of this?
Well, I will say that we're trying to serve the most people with the funding that we have.
Yeah.
And so this idea that there's interest from a more international population
Yeah.
means that we've chosen to try to create a form of the app that can be used more broadly,
Hmm.
independent of the study for that reason.
Right.
And so that's something that was I guess we should have anticipated that. But but it was something that we didn't design for.
Right. Hmm.
But there's no reason that we can't adjust. And so we chose to do that. And that slowed us down a little bit.
Right. Which, overall commendable. And I think, for being able to create the widest access for an app that's going to be able to be helpful internationally, why not go down that road, especially if there are things like no cost extensions that sort of allow you to do that. So when should we maybe expect to see some results, updates at future conferences, maybe publications?
So the idea is to be shipping muffins in April.
Yep.
That means data will be coming back and analyzable over the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the following year, we should be publishing.
Mm-hmm.
We are already, so on the heels of this grant, we were funded by CureGrin to do a similar study with that population. And so we're presenting at their conference.
Yeah.
And we also have presented at Angelman,
Wonderful.
Angelman conference and at a SYNGAP conference. So we're definitely interacting with a number of conditions that are associated with really severe GI.
Right.
As a way to kind of think about how to follow up on this incredible opportunity that Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation has given us. And then we're also exploring other grant options like a PCORI, so we're looking at ways to move on from this and try to, because this study was to conduct the blue muffin test in 75 people, which is clearly not the whole population. So
right. Well, you have to start somewhere.
You have to start somewhere for sure.
I think, right. And I think, and as a reminder to our families, the idea behind these grants are really to be important seed funding or pilot funding for bigger projects. And so I feel like you're doing it, so perfectly you're really perfecting the app, you're perfecting your protocol so that, the bigger federal funding PCORI are going to be sort of like you've got something really valid and usable and now you can do it in 200 people, 300
Right.
people.
That's the idea, is to try to make it so that what we said, to validate, really make something
Right.
that stood the test of a smaller study and can be that shows that it could be scaled up.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and it's also exciting to hear that there is some potential like future cross syndrome collaborations as well. I mean, I think GI has already been a really good spot for that, kind of with the Candid project. And so it'd be nice to see sort of that move along and even, some comparative study in the future to find out what is potentially unique to PMS, Phelan-McDermid syndrome versus GRIN2B or SYNGAP. So,
Yep. Yep.
um, is there anything else kind of you're working on that might be interested to our Phelan-McDermid syndrome community? I mean, I know you got your hands in a little bit of everything, but kind of other things kind of in the pipeline or
Yeah. So I think one of the things um, that we're excited about working on is pathways that might be able to be leveraged to improve motility.
Yep.
And so we got funding from the SYNGAP Research Fund, and we're doing a screen of some promotility compounds, and one of them is an essential amino acid, tryptophan,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually a precursor to serotonin,
Yep.
and it's converted by the microbiome to indole, which is also promotility. So we're definitely going to test indole in SHANK3 to see if that can get the guts moving, because
Mm-hmm.
so basically, one of the things on the horizon is using the fish to query
Right.
how to get motility back.
Yeah, exactly. Well, good luck to that. Keep us updated. Because yeah, I mean, the more we learn about motility through sort of this first funded project, I see definitely a future for maybe even a future potential funded project sort of targeting specific uh, ways to treat the motility issues. So, one of the things that I've been wanting to do, sort of with this new podcast, especially focused on our 2023 awardees, is to get to know the researchers behind the grants better. Research takes a lot of time, as we've highlighted this podcast, and we've learned that you have this background in basic science and zebrafish, and kind of have your hands in a couple different other rare disorders. But kind of tell me something fun fact about yourself, or something that our families can get to know who Dr. Julia Dallman is, kind of outside of work.
Okay, so I like getting exercise, but I have trouble finding the time for it. And
Fair.
so my solution is to bike to work. So I bike to work and I bike home, and I live in Miami. So Miami is full of crazy beasts. And so one of my pleasures of biking is, at least at this season, I get to visit manatees on the way in and the way back from work.
I am very jealous.
So.
We do not have manatees in Cincinnati, so it also would be very dangerous for me to bike to work from here.
It's a little dangerous. No, I have a yellow vest with, reflective tape.
Yeah.
Miami is not necessarily a bike friendly place, but I figured out my route and it works.
Perfect. And there's manatees on it. So
And there are manatees.
yeah, I love that. So before I let you go, is there anything else that you want to share with our PMSF community and the families who are listening?
I just want to say thank you for participating. I think I've been interacting with this community since 2016, and it's really inspiring to come to the conferences and interact with families. And we've had great participation so far in the app user interface tests, and we look forward to the next round.
Great. I appreciate that. I also wanted to say that the 2016 Phelan-McPosium was my first interaction with the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation as well. And then I had a brief stint in Fragile X and I came back right around. But I love that we both sort of have that first 2016 memory there,
That's
which
awesome.
was such a fantastic conference. Well, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Dallman. We're so grateful for your commitment to Phelan-McDermid syndrome and cannot wait to hear about the results of your study. And we'll make sure that the families get to know more about kind of the next recruitment process as well. Thanks for everyone who turned in. We're so excited to get this podcast up and running again and to extend our science communication to additional webinars, blog posts, so keep your eyes out. Of course, if you have any topics of interest that you want to hear about, please email us at info@pmsf.org. Thanks all. Bye.